Hello and welcome to Data Management. This is Module 3, Part 1. In this segment of Module 3, we're going to learn about the relational data model. Every relational database management system, such as MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle's DB, or IBM's DB2, all rely on the relational data model to work. So in this segment, we're going to learn about the three types of relationships that can be involved. We're going to learn how to draw entity relationship diagrams and why they're used. We'll spend some time looking at primary and foreign keys and how the foreign keys are used to maintain relationships. We'll learn a few data modeling conventions. And then finally, we'll learn how to use a database schema representation in conjunction with our entity relationship diagrams. The relational data model, data stored in tables corresponding to entities. Recall that an entity is simply something that we want to keep track of, something we want to store data about. An entity might be employee, or customer, or supplier, or product. Each of these entities that we want to store data about are going to be represented in the data model by one or more tables. Entities are connected through relationships. So a customer may be connected to an invoice. A supplier may be connected to a purchase order. Products might also be connected to invoices. For each of these relationships, we have to determine whether they are a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, or a many-to-many relationship. So let's go through each of those in turn. A one-to-one relationship is where the instance of one entity can have a relationship with one and only one instance of the other entity. So for example, if we take a look at states and state capitals, each state has exactly one state capital, and each state capital is affiliated with exactly one state. You can't have more than one capital for a state, and each capital is a capital for only one state, not multiple states. So it is a one-to-one relationship, one and only one at both ends of the relationship. A one-to-many relationship is when an instance of the first entity can have a relationship with one or more instances of the second entity. But instances of the second entity can be related to only one instance of the first. So here we have something where we've got the state of birth and then famous people. Each person was born in only one state, but each state can have multiple famous people that were born within that state. So it is a one-to-many relationship. And then the final type of relationship we need to be able to maintain is that of a many-to-many relationship. And that's when instances of each entity can be related to one or more instances of the other entity. So we could have state lived in. Each famous person might live in multiple states, and each state might have multiple famous people who have lived within that state at some point in their lives. So in this instance we have, or in this case we have, a many-to-many relationship. Those are the only three types of relationships we need to keep track of. One-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many. There are lots of different ways of diagramming relationships, entities. We're going to just focus on the two most common ones, recognizing, however, that whoever you're working with, they may have their own conventions or diagramming techniques they prefer to use. But we're only going to focus on the two most common ones. The first might be called a simplified Chen notation, where we've got the entity represented in this case a square. The relationship is represented by a diamond shape, and then we specify on each end whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many. So in this case, it's indicating that it's a one-to-many relationship where each instance of entity 1 may be related to multiple instances of entity 2, but each instance of entity 2 is associated with exactly one or only one instance of entity 1. The second approach is referred to as crow's feet, and it's showing exactly the same relationship, so it's a one-to-many relationship. It's indicated by a single line on the one side and then the crow's foot on the multiple sides. So again, entity 1 would have multiple instances of entity 2 that's associated with, whereas entity 2 is associated with exactly one or only one instance of entity 1. So the example we had previously could be birth date would be entity 1, and entity 2 would be famous person. Okay, let's try and put this into practice and see how it works. Let's assume you work for a company and they want you to create a database that will allow people to keep track of projects. They want to be able to look at a project, search on it based on the project title. They might also want to find out, well, departments the project is associated with, or look at it from a department level and say how many projects does that department have ongoing at a single time. And also we want to be able to keep track of the employees who are assigned to the project. So before we go further, what entities can you identify in this example? What are the things that we want to keep track of? Well, hopefully you come up with these three. We want to keep track of the department and all the projects that are associated with that department. We also want to keep track of the employee or employees and which employees are assigned to which projects. So the next step in drawing an ER diagram is to try and identify the relationships between the entities. So a way of doing this is to ask yourself, okay, what is the relationship between department and project? Can a department have more than one project on go at a time? And if the answer is yes, then that would mean that we would have a mini on the side of the relationship between project and department on the side of the project. And then we could ask the reverse direction for that relationship. Can a project be assigned to more than one department? Well, we're going to have to either make some assumptions about relationships, or in a real-world example, we would find out. Basically, we would ask somebody, is a project assigned to one department? If so, okay. What we have here is then apparently a one-to-many relationship. Similarly, we take a look at the relationship between project and employee. Can an employee be assigned to more than one project? Can a project have more than one employee assigned to it? If the answer to both those questions is yes, then what we would have would be a many-to-many relationship. We might also ask ourselves, well, is there a relationship between employee and department? Quick answer is probably yes, but we may not want to maintain that relationship in this particular database. Let's continue. I'll try and explain what I mean by that. So, if we were to go with the relationships we've got established here, it's showing that a project is associated with one department. A department might have many projects associated with it. A project can be associated with many employees, and an employee may be associated with many projects. The reason we don't have a relationship between employee and department is it isn't necessary. If we make the assumption, which we have here, that employees only work on projects within their own department, what that means is if you give me an employee name or identification number, I can tell you which projects that person is associated with. And then I can tell you which department that project is associated with. By inference, that will allow me to say, okay, this employee is assigned to that project is associated with that department, therefore that employee works in that department. Also, we're making another assumption, the final one here listed here, we only want to keep track of employees assigned to a project. In other words, if there are any employees in the department who aren't working on projects, we're not keeping track of them in this database. Presumably we've got another HR or human resource database that they would be included in. This is part of what the process of drawing entity relationship diagrams entails. It requires either making assumptions or, in a real environment, identifying business rules. Can we in fact have a project associated with more than one department? No, we can't. Okay, so let's establish what those business rules are or what assumptions are, and that's what allows us to continue and to complete the actual ER diagram. Okay, the ER diagram is just step one. It gives us a quick overview of what we're trying to keep track of. It establishes the relationships, but we're not finished yet. Now we need to find a way to turn that ER diagram into something that can be converted into an actual database using, like MySQL, the create table commands. We need to identify what tables are needed, all of the attributes in those tables, how we're going to link those attributes, those tables together. One way to do that is to draw what is referred to as a data model. So we start off with our ER diagram. Each entity from our ER diagram is going to be represented by a single box. So we've got employee, project, and department. Next step is to maintain or describe or demonstrate what the relationship is between each of those. So just taking it directly from our ER diagram, we had a one-to-many relationship between project and department, and a many-to-many relationship between employee and project. However, one thing we need to keep in mind is a relational data model, while it can handle a one-to-many relationship directly, it can't handle a many-to-many relationship directly. So relational database management systems do not have any mechanism in place to directly handle a many-to-many relationship. The good news is there's a way around that. And here's what we do. Anytime we've got a many-to-many relationship, we're going to take that many-to-many relationship and we're going to turn it into two one-to-many relationships. And the way we do that is by inserting what is referred to as a relational entity, or if you want to think about it in table terms, you could call it an intersection table. So we're going to take that many-to-many relationship, and as I mentioned, we're going to convert it into two one-to-many relationships. So now employee is associated with something in a one-to-many relationship. Project is also associated with that something in a one-to-many relationship. But naturally now we have to come up with a name for this relational entity that we've created. So we're going to call this assignment. We're going to say, okay, each employee is assigned to a project, so why don't we call this assignment, this relational entity. Next, we're going to add all of the attributes for each entity within the box that is associated with that entity. So we've got employee ID, name, address, city, state, zip, and phone, for example. In addition, we need to define a primary key for each table. Keep in mind that the primary key is a unique identifier so that we're going to be able to identify each specific instance of that entity. So we need to have an employee ID which is unique, or project ID, department ID. And in this case, we're also going to have something called an assignment ID. Okay, this is getting closer, but we're still not done. We need to identify how we're going to maintain these relationships. When we actually build tables using a create table command, how are we going to maintain these relationships? Well, the way it's done is using foreign keys. A foreign key is the primary key from one table added to a second table. The primary key in one table is always going to, the foreign key in one table is always going to be represented. The foreign key in one table will always be equivalent to or represented by the primary key from another table. This is the most common way of storing relationships in a database. So here's the way we do this. We're going to label our foreign keys. In this case, we'll just put an FK behind them to indicate which they are. when you have a one-to-many relationship, you take the primary key from the one side of the relationship and you add it as a foreign key on the many side of the relationship. So for example, you can see we have department ID is the primary key on the department table. We have now taken that, it's on the one side of the relationship with project. We've now taken department ID and added it to the project table as a foreign key. Similarly, we've added project ID and employee ID as foreign keys in the assignment table. That's how we handle a one-to-many relationship. If we have a one-to-one relationship, it actually doesn't matter which primary key we use as a foreign key in the other table. Either way will work. Okay, to see how this actually works, let's take a look at the two of the ones from the previous slide. So we have project and department. So we've got project ID